Armaean 6 was not a beautiful planet. It was dust, smoke, and endless war. For 6 long months, humanity's armies had been trapped outside the bastion of Narel, a fortress so strong that even light seemed afraid to touch it. Its massive walls were made of neutronium alloy, and its shields had never once been broken in 800 years. Every morning the alien commander, General Rorvath, sent a broadcast across the battlefield. His deep, rumbling voice echoed through the air like thunder. "Your weapons are toys. Your courage is noise. You'll never breach my gate." The alien soldiers inside the fortress laughed, their confidence as strong as the steel around them. But outside in the human camp the mood was very different. The ground was covered with broken equipment and empty ration packs. Tents leaned against one another like tired soldiers. Men and women with hollow eyes walked slowly, their uniforms dirty and burned from failed assaults. They had thrown everything they had, missiles, plasma cannons, drones, and still the wall stood tall and unbroken. No one spoke much anymore. Until the day Lieutenant Helen Ward arrived. She stepped off a small transport shuttle, her boots sinking into the dusty ground. Her armor was scratched but clean, her eyes sharp and focused. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't look beaten either. There was something different about her, something quiet and dangerous. A young officer rushed to her side, holding a tablet and trying to sound formal. "Lieutenant Ward? Commander Yuki is waiting for you in the command tent." Helen adjusted her gear and nodded. "Great," she said. "I do love a good command tent. Very theatrical." The officer blinked, not sure if she was joking, then hurried ahead to lead her through the maze of tents. Inside the command tent, the air was thick with heat and frustration. Holographic maps floated in the air, showing red dots where soldiers had died and blue lines where assaults had failed. Commander Yuki stood at the center, arms crossed, eyes cold. She looked like someone who had stopped sleeping months ago. "Lieutenant Helen Ward," she said without looking up. "Your reputation precedes you." Helen dropped her gear bag beside the table. "The reputation for creative problem-solving, or the one where I nearly got court-martialed twice?" Yuki's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd had in weeks. "Both," she said. "Welcome to our little piece of hell." Helen studied the hologram of the fortress. It looked perfect, smooth, symmetrical, glowing faintly under Harmaean's twin suns. It didn't just look strong. It looked proud. Yuki pointed to the rotating structure. "We've thrown everything at it. Plasma cutters, kinetic penetrators, thermal bombs. The walls absorb everything. The shield regenerates faster than we can drain it." "What about the gate?" Helen asked, leaning closer. 400 tons of alloy. They don't use it anymore, supplies come from tunnels underground. The gate's more of a monument now. A symbol of how untouchable they are. Helen tilted her head. "So it's not for function. It's for pride." "Exactly," Yuki said. "And that pride has cost us 3,000 soldiers." The room went silent. The sound of the wind outside filled the space like a whisper of ghosts. Helen stared at the gate hologram. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. Then she smiled. Just a little. "If nothing works," she said quietly, "then maybe it's time to try something stupid." The officers exchanged worried glances. One of them spoke up nervously. "With respect, Lieutenant, we've tried everything. There's nothing left to—" Helen cut him off. "That's the problem. You've been trying everything logical. Sometimes the universe rewards stupid." Yuki raised an eyebrow. "You sound very confident." Helen shrugged. "Not confidence. Curiosity." She turned toward the exit, her boots echoing softly against the metal floor. Outside, the twin suns were setting, painting the fortress walls in gold and red. It stood in the distance, massive, shining, and smug. The alien general's voice came through the loudspeakers again, mocking, full of pride. "Sleep well, humans. Tomorrow you'll fail again." Helen stopped walking and looked toward the fortress. The wind lifted her hair as she stared at the gate that had never fallen in centuries. "Let's see," she whispered, her voice steady, almost amused. "How unbreakable you really are." Then she turned and disappeared into the night. The guards at the camp gate watched her go. None of them knew what she was planning. None of them dared to ask. But something in the air had changed. For the first time in months, there was a spark of something dangerous in the silence. Something that smelled a lot like hope. Inside the bastion of Narel, the walls hummed with power. Light ran through alien circuits like rivers of fire. Every corridor smelled of ozone and oil, perfect order, perfect control. At the highest tower stood General Rorvath, commander of the fortress, his claws resting on the railing as he stared at the human camp miles away. His armor gleamed like polished stone, marked with symbols of victories stretching back centuries. He watched through holographic screens as human soldiers dragged equipment through mud, patched broken weapons, and argued near dying fires. Rorvath laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that filled the hall. "Pathetic creatures," he said. "They have no claws, no armor, and still they dream of conquering me." His officers stood beside him, smaller in size but full of nervous loyalty. One of them, a young tactician named Vorin, bowed low. "General, the humans have not attacked in 2 days. Perhaps they are planning another assault." Rorvath waved a clawed hand lazily. "They are planning how to starve slower. Let them think. Let them hope. It makes the end taste better." The officers chuckled, but not all of them smiled. A few exchanged quiet glances. The humans had survived for 6 months, longer than most sieges. They fought even when logic said to surrender. That unsettled some of the aliens, though none dared to say it aloud. Rorvath didn't notice their silence. He was watching one screen closely, a tiny figure moving alone through the desert far from the human camp. He leaned forward, frowning. "Zoom in." The hologram expanded, showing a human woman wearing desert camouflage and carrying a small device. She moved calmly, placing something on the ground, then walking several meters before placing another. Vorin tilted his head. "A scout, perhaps?" Rorvath snorted. "A lost fool. Ignore her. One human can't move mountains." But the image stayed on his screen, that single human figure against the endless sand, walking with purpose. Back in the human camp, Lieutenant Helen Ward was busy. She knelt in the dust, her gloves dirty, connecting small metal spheres to the ground with thick cables. Around her, the wind howled through the valley, carrying the faint hum of alien shields in the distance. Her comm crackled. "Lieutenant, what exactly are you doing?" Commander Yuki's voice came through the radio. Helen smiled faintly. "Something simple. I'm listening to the planet." Yuki sounded confused. "Listening?" Helen tightened the last cable. "You said we can't break the walls." "Fine. But walls stand on something. The ground. What if we make the ground angry?" She pressed a switch on her wrist. The devices activated, sending deep, low-frequency vibrations through the rock below. The sound was almost too deep to hear, a pulse that traveled through the sand like a slow heartbeat. The equipment in the human camp began to flicker. Lights blinked. The air trembled slightly. Yuki's hologram appeared beside her, the commander's expression sharp. "Helen, you're destabilizing the terrain." Helen looked up, the faint glow of the fortress reflecting in her eyes. "That's the point." She turned off her comm and kept working. Inside the bastion, Rorvatha's soldiers noticed it first. Control panels blinked strangely. Lights dimmed, then flared too bright. "Power fluctuations, General," Vorin reported. "Sensors reading ground movement." Rorvath frowned. "Movement? There's no seismic activity on this planet." "Except there is now," another officer said quietly. The general slammed a clawed fist onto the console. "Impossible. Our sensors." He stopped. The lights above them flickered again, and for the first time in 800 years, one of the fortress screens went dark. A brief silence followed. The humming walls seemed to shudder like something alive. Rorvath looked up slowly. "Restore power immediately." "Trying, sir," Vorin said. "Systems, resetting." "Something is interfering from beneath us." The general's eyes narrowed. "From beneath?" He turned back to the screen showing the desert. The human woman was still there, standing beside a row of strange devices that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. Rorvatha's throat rumbled. "What are you doing, little human?" At the human camp, Yuki watched the readings spike. The ground sensors flashed red. Her voice trembled slightly. "Helen, the seismic waves are increasing. You could destabilize the entire valley." Helen didn't stop. She was already moving to the next device. "Good. Then maybe their perfect walls will finally feel something." She looked at the distant fortress, its glowing walls flickering under the twin suns. Her eyes narrowed. "You've stood for 8 centuries. Let's see how you handle a little earthquake." She pressed another switch. A deep rumble rolled across the landscape. Dust leapt from the ground. The human camp shook. Even the fortress, that perfect, unbreakable fortress, seemed to tremble ever so slightly. In the command tent, Yuki grabbed the table to steady herself. "Helen. The readings, this is insane." Helen's voice came calm through the radio. "Insanity and genius are cousins, Commander. Sometimes you need both to win." Inside the bastion, the alien general stared as cracks of static ran through his holographic displays. Report, he barked. Voron's voice shook. Something's happening under the foundations, General. The fortress is vibrating. Rorvath growled. Then increase shield output. It's not the shields, sir, it's the ground. The fortress rumbled again, louder this time. For a moment, dust fell from the ceiling. The walls themselves seemed to groan. Rorvath gripped the railing hard, eyes glowing with rage. Find that human. And bring me her head. Far below the fortress, Helen smiled as her instruments blinked green. The readings were perfect. The resonance had begun. She looked toward the massive fortress in the distance, its shining walls trembling slightly under the twin suns. Let's wake you up, she whispered. The ground shook once more, slow, deep, powerful. And for the first time in 800 years, the bastion of Neral made a sound no one had ever heard before. It creaked. The next morning, Harmaean 6 was quiet, too quiet. The fortress of Neral still stood tall on the horizon, glowing silver under the twin suns. But its usual hum was gone. The air felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. In the human camp, soldiers whispered nervously. Some said the ground had moved last night. Others swore they'd seen lights flicker on the fortress walls, like it had flinched. Commander Yuki hadn't slept. She stood over the tactical table, eyes on the readings Helen had sent hours before. The graphs showed strange vibrations deep under the planet's crust. It looked more like an earthquake than a weapon. Her second-in-command frowned. Ma'am, this can't be right. The ground under the fortress shifted. Yuki nodded slowly. Then Lieutenant Ward did something impossible. The tent flap opened. Helen Ward stepped inside, covered in dust, her face calm but her eyes burning with quiet fire. Yuki looked up sharply. You're alive. Disappointed? Helen asked with a faint smile. Yuki crossed her arms. You made the whole valley shake. Half my engineers think the planet's angry. Maybe it should be, Helen said. She dropped a small data drive onto the table. The resonance worked. The fortress isn't as perfect as they think. Yuki leaned closer. Explain. Helen tapped the holographic console. A glowing model of the bastion appeared, covered in red lines. Neutronium alloy, strongest material in the galaxy. But nothing's truly solid. Everything vibrates. You just need to find the right frequency. Yuki frowned. And you found it? Helen nodded. Partially. I used the planet itself as an amplifier. It's not about breaking the wall, it's about making it move. Even a god can fall if the ground beneath it shifts. Yuki stared at her. You're insane. Helen grinned. Probably. But I think it's working. Inside the fortress, alarms flickered again. Systems glitched, sensors looped. General Rorvath stood in the control hall, claws digging into the metal floor. Engineers scrambled around him, shouting over the hum of unstable energy. Status, he barked. One technician stammered, minor cracks in substructure levels 4 and 5, sir. Nothing major, but it's spreading. Rorvath's tail lashed behind him. Spreading? The bastion does not crack. It endures. Voron, his young officer, hesitated before speaking. General, the humans might have found a way to use the planet against us. The energy readings. Silence. Rorvath roared. They are insects. Their weapons are meaningless. Activate full ground stabilizers. Yes, sir. As the crew obeyed, the walls trembled again, this time loud enough for everyone to feel it. Dust fell from the ceiling. Several screens blinked and went black. Rorvath's breathing grew heavy. What in the stars is that human doing? Outside, Helen was back in the desert, staring through binoculars at the fortress. She could see it now, a faint shimmer along the lower walls like heat ripples. The ground under her boots pulsed with a low vibration. Her earpiece buzzed. Lieutenant Ward, this is Commander Yuki. Your readings are unstable. You're pushing the system too hard. I know, Helen said calmly. That's the idea. You could tear the valley apart. Helen smiled faintly. If it takes the fortress with it, I'll call that a win. She crouched beside a small control case, her fingers dancing across the glowing screen. Each keystroke increased the resonance level. The humming grew louder. The sand itself began to shift in waves. She looked at the fortress, massive, proud, silent, and whispered, "Let's dance." Inside the bastion, Rorvath's fury turned to disbelief. The entire control room shook. Warning symbols flashed across every screen. The main engineer shouted, "Sir, the Western Foundation is cracking." What? Rorvath growled. Subsurface structure compromised. There's movement below the gate. He stormed to the main viewport, his claws digging deep into the railing. Through the haze of dust outside he saw it, a tiny fracture running across the base of the gate. A single piece of metal flaked off, falling into the sand below. It was so small, but it was real. The general's stomach turned cold. For 800 years the bastion had stood untouched. Now for the first time it had bled. In the human camp, a cheer erupted. Soldiers pointed and shouted. "Look! The wall! The wall's cracking!" Yuki rushed out of her tent, eyes wide. Through the haze she saw it too, a thin line of silver dust trailing from the fortress gate. Helen lowered her binoculars, a slow smile spreading across her face. "There it is," she said softly. "The first crack." Yuki's voice came through her calm, half shocked, half amazed. "How did you?" Helen interrupted. "Because nothing is unbreakable, Commander. Not walls. Not pride." Inside the fortress, Rorvath stared in silence. His officers waited for orders, but he didn't speak. For the first time in his long career he felt something alien in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known since his first battle centuries ago. Fear. He looked at the holographic projection of the fortress, now covered in small red lines. The human woman had done something no army, no empire, no god had ever done. She had made the bastion of Nerau hurt. Rorvath slammed his fist against the railing, sparks flying. "Enough," he roared. "Prepare the assault fleet. Burn them from the sand before they can act again." Outside, Helen saw movement at the fortress gate, doors opening, ships powering up. She didn't look scared. She only smiled wider. "Good," she whispered. "Come out and play." She adjusted her headset and radioed the command tent. "Commander, tell the troops to brace. The general's angry." "What's your plan now?" Yuki asked, her voice tense. Helen stared at the fortress, the faint cracks still shining under the suns. "Same as before," she said quietly. "Make the impossible hurt a little more." Dust clouds rolled across the burning desert. The crack on the bastion's gate shimmered faintly in the morning light, a wound that shouldn't exist. Human soldiers stared in disbelief. For months they had fought, bled, and buried their friends in this cursed land. Now for the first time they saw hope, in a line no thicker than a finger. Inside the human command tent, the air buzzed with energy. Commander Yuki leaned over the hollow table, her voice sharp. "Status report. What's happening at the gate?" An officer replied, "Cracks expanding along the western plate. The fortress shields are fluctuating but alien ships are powering up. Looks like they're preparing to launch a counterattack." Yuki clenched her fists. "Of course they are." Her gaze shifted to Lieutenant Helen Ward, who stood beside the table, silent, eyes fixed on the hologram of the fortress. She looked calm, too calm. "Helen," Yuki said carefully, "you've done something no one else could. But now the fortress is awake. They'll come for you first." Helen didn't look up. "They should. I'm the one they're scared of." In the fortress war room, chaos reigned. Alarms screamed. Soldiers scrambled to their stations. General Rorvath towered over his officers, his scaled hands gripping the edge of the command table. His voice thundered across the room. "Deploy air wings Theta through Omicron. Target their artillery lines. I want the human camp erased." "Yes, General." Vorin, his young aide, hesitated. "Sir, the stabilizers are still malfunctioning. If we deploy too much power we risk further damage to the substructure." Rorvath's eyes flared red. "Do you think I care? That human has insulted the bastion. Do as I command." The fortress walls groaned again, a deep, metallic moan that echoed through the corridors. The engineers froze, fear in their eyes. For 8 centuries the bastion had been silent and unshakable. Now it sounded alive, and in pain. Outside, a deep rumble rolled across the sand. Dozens of alien dropships burst from the fortress gates, leaving trails of blue flame in the air. Their sleek hulls shimmered as they charged toward the human lines. The ground trembled beneath their power. "Contact! Enemy air units incoming!" a soldier shouted from the watchtower. Yuki's command voice cut through the chaos. "All units to defensive positions. Bring up the rail batteries. Move." The human camp exploded into motion, soldiers running, mechs powering up, gun towers rising from the dunes. Helen stood at the edge of the camp, watching the alien ships approach. She wasn't afraid. She simply whispered to herself, "Let's see how far you'll go to protect your pride." The first alien salvo hit like thunder. Explosions ripped through the human front lines. Sand and fire filled the air. Yuki's radio screamed with overlapping voices, reports, screams, commands. Unit 5 down. East wall hit. We're losing power to the right flank. Yuki slammed her fist on the table. Hold the line. Do not let them break through. In the distance, she saw Helen sprinting across the dunes toward the front, dragging a heavy pack behind her. Helen, get back here, she shouted through the comms. Helen's voice came back, calm and steady. Can't. I need to be closer. Closer to what? The gate. Rorvath watched from his fortress tower as the battle unfolded below. Alien ships soared through the sky, raining energy blasts down on human trenches. He allowed himself a cruel smile. They'll learn what happens when they defy me. But then, something strange appeared on his tactical display, a signal near the fortress base, small and human. He zoomed in. A lone figure was running across the desert, right toward the fortress itself. Rorvath frowned. Who is that? His aide glanced at the readings. Single human life sign. No armor, no escort. Just carrying some kind of energy pack. Rorvath leaned closer to the screen. He could see her now, a small human, hair tied back, eyes locked on the fortress. Helen Ward, he muttered, remembering the intercepted human reports. The demolition expert. The one they called the engineer of miracles. He hissed softly. So, the insect comes to die. Helen reached the outer ridge, panting, her suit covered in dust. Alien fighters roared overhead, but she didn't flinch. She dropped the heavy pack, flipped it open and activated the control unit. Blue lights flashed. The pack began to hum, vibrating deep into the ground. Her comm buzzed with Yuki's panicked voice. Helen, what are you doing? Helen smiled faintly. Finishing what I started. The vibrations grew stronger. The sand beneath her boots pulsed in rhythm. The frequency was perfect, the same resonance that cracked the bastion before. But this time amplified tenfold. Inside the fortress, seismic alarms went wild. Engineers shouted, the foundations are collapsing. The ground it's moving again. Rorvath turned eyes wide. No, impossible. The floor under his feet shook violently. Massive support beams groaned, walls cracked and lights flickered out. He looked at the hologram, red warnings spreading like blood. She's tearing the ground apart, someone screamed. Rorvath slammed his claws onto the console. Shut it down. Stabilize the... Before he could finish, a deep rumble shook the entire fortress. The great gate of Neral shuddered, once, twice, then stopped. Silence fell. For a moment, everyone thought it was over. Then, with a sound like the scream of a dying god, the gate moved. It didn't break yet, but it trembled. The unbreakable gate of Neral, untouched for 800 years, had just bowed. In the human camp, soldiers stared in awe as the massive fortress gate vibrated, dust pouring from its edges like falling ash. Someone whispered, it's moving? The gate's moving. Yuki's voice trembled. She did it. She actually did it. Helen stood on the ridge, watching as cracks spread wider along the metal surface. She raised her communicator, breathing hard. Commander, she said softly, tell the troops to get ready. Ready for what? Yuki asked. Helen's eyes didn't leave the fortress. Because when that gate falls, we're going in. The world shook. For the first time in 800 years, the bastion of Neral, the fortress that had never fallen, began to scream. Metal groaned. The ground rippled. Clouds of dust rose from cracks that split across its perfect, shining walls. Human soldiers watched in silent awe. No one cheered yet. They were too afraid to believe it was real. Commander Yuki stood on a dune near the command post, her face pale in the orange light. The entire horizon glowed with fire and dust. Helen, she whispered. What did you do? The radio crackled to life. Still here, came Lieutenant Helen Ward's voice, steady but tired. And it's working. Yuki gripped the comm tightly. The fortress is collapsing. You need to fall back now. No, Helen said softly. Not yet. It's not finished. Inside the bastion, chaos ruled. Alarms shrieked. Power conduits burst like arteries. Plasma smoke filled the hallways. General Rorvath stormed through the control deck, his massive frame covered in dust and sparks. Engineers scrambled to stay out of his way. Stabilize the shields, he roared. Get me firing control online. I want every cannon aimed at that human camp. Sir, the reactors are overloading, one shouted. We can't power weapons and shields at once. Then choose. Rorvath snarled. Either we die like warriors or we let them mock us for eternity. The room shook again, lights flickering. A deep rumble followed, not from outside but from the core of the fortress itself. A technician screamed, "The main gate supports are collapsing. The hinges can't hold." Rorvatha's blood turned cold. He slammed his clawed hand on the console. "No, no, that's impossible. That gate survives star bombardments." But even as he said it, the great steel heart of the bastion groaned once more, like something ancient being torn open after centuries of silence. Outside, the ground split apart. Dust swirled in massive spirals. The once perfect gate of Neral began to bend. Helen stood on the ridge, wind whipping her hair as she watched. Her detonator's display showed the seismic wave readings climbing beyond safe limits. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Beautiful," she whispered. She pressed a sequence on her wrist pad. The device pulsed, one final surge of energy feeding into the ground. Her comms buzzed again. It was Yuki, her voice breaking through static. "Helen, what's happening?" Helen took a breath. "It's time." She looked at the bastion one last time, the monument of arrogance that had buried thousands of her people, and whispered, "For everyone who fell before me." Then she pressed the final trigger. The sound that followed was not an explosion. It was something deeper, a roar that tore through the bones of every living creature within miles. The bastion's foundations gave way first. Then came the walls, their proud symmetry twisting like paper. The great gate, the unbreakable gate, began to split. Massive bolts tore free, spinning into the air. The glowing shield generator atop the fortress cracked, sending arcs of lightning in every direction. Rorvath fell to his knees as the command tower buckled. He stared in disbelief at the image on his central monitor, the impossible sight of his fortress bowing before a single human. "No," he rasped. "No human could do this." His aide screamed, "General, the gate, it's falling." Rorvath turned just in time to see it, the colossal gate collapsing forward in a wave of fire and dust. It hit the ground like a meteor, shaking the planet. The gate of Neral, the symbol of alien strength, pride and history, lay shattered in the dirt. Silence followed. A silence so heavy it pressed on every chest. Then came the sound of a voice, human, strong, defiant, echoing through open comms. Helen's voice. "Commander Yuki, the gate is down." For a heartbeat, Yuki couldn't speak. She stared at the massive dust cloud on the horizon, where the fortress once stood proud. Then her voice returned, quiet, almost reverent. "Understood, Lieutenant. All units advance. Take the bastion." And then, as if a dam had broken, cheers erupted across the battlefield. Thousands of soldiers screamed in victory, in disbelief, in pure relief. For 6 long months they had been trapped in a nightmare. Now it was over. They charged forward, weapons raised, through the cratered sands and into the fallen fortress. Inside the ruins, Helen slowly opened her eyes. The world around her was a blur of fire and smoke. She was alive, barely. Her armor was cracked, her comms half dead. She struggled to her feet, coughing, and looked at the gate behind her, now a mountain of twisted metal. A shadow moved in the smoke. She raised her sidearm, ready, but it wasn't an alien. It was a human soldier, helmet cracked, carrying a torn flag. He looked at her and whispered, You did it." Helen smiled weakly. "No," she said. "We did." He laughed, a tired, broken sound. "The aliens, they're running." Helen looked toward the heart of the fortress. Flames danced where alien pride had stood. "Let them," she said softly. "They'll remember." In his final moments, General Rorvath stood amid the collapsing command chamber, staring at the ruined gate through the cracked viewport. He whispered to himself, "She broke the unbreakable." Then the ceiling came down, and the proud general of Neral vanished beneath the rubble. As dawn rose over Harman 6, human banners flew from the ruins. The bastion of Neral, once the symbol of alien superiority, now stood as a monument to human will. Commander Yuki stood beside a medical tent, watching as soldiers carried the wounded, their faces shining with something that had been missing for months, hope. She spotted Helen sitting on a crate, bandaged, staring at the horizon. Yuki walked over and said quietly, "You kicked down the unbreakable gate." Helen smiled faintly. "He shouldn't have told me I couldn't." Both women laughed softly. Then Yuki said, "You know they'll tell this story for centuries, right?" Helen looked at the shattered fortress and whispered, "Good. Let them remember what happens when you tell a human it's impossible." The sun rose over the ruins of the bastion of Neral, turning the battlefield gold. For the first time in half a year, Harman 6 was quiet. No gunfire. No screams. Only wind blowing through twisted steel and shattered pride. Commander Yuki stood on the edge of the collapsed fortress, looking down at the ruins. Human engineers were already crawling over the wreckage, searching for survivors and salvaging what they could. The gate, that mighty wall of legend, lay broken behind her. Its fragments gleamed faintly in the light, like the bones of some dead god. Lieutenant Helen Ward walked up beside her, still limping from her injuries. Her armor was cracked and scorched, but her eyes were steady. She looked at the ruins for a long moment before speaking. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said quietly. "Something that stood for 800 years, gone in one night." Yuki nodded slowly. "You did what everyone thought was impossible." Helen shook her head. "No. I just reminded them that nothing's unbreakable." Hours later, inside the fortress remains, teams worked through the wreckage. Most of the alien defenders were dead or had fled into the mountains. But the fortress itself, it was still alive in a way. Machines deep underground still hummed. Lights flickered through cracks in the earth. Strange energy readings filled the human scanners. Captain Rowan, one of Yuki's field officers, reported through comms. "Commander, you should see this. We found something under the main gate chamber." Yuki and Helen exchanged a look. "Let's go," Yuki said. They made their way down through the broken corridors, flashlights cutting through the smoke. The deeper they went, the warmer it got. The air hummed like electricity. When they reached the lower level, everyone froze. In front of them stood a massive sealed door, not made of the same alloy as the fortress but something older, darker. Alien symbols glowed faintly across its surface. The walls around it were covered in vines of pulsing light, feeding power into whatever was sealed behind. Helen frowned. That wasn't on any blueprint. Yuki turned to her. "What do you think it is?" Helen stepped closer, running a hand along the markings. "They built the bastion around this," she murmured. "This isn't a fortress. It's a lock." A tremor shook the ground. One of the soldiers stumbled. The glowing lines across the door pulsed brighter, as if reacting to their presence. Rowan swore under his breath. "Commander, readings are spiking. Radiation, power, everything. We should leave." But before Yuki could answer, a low voice filled the chamber. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was old, echoing through their helmets like a whisper in their bones. "Who dares disturb the seal of Neyrau?" Everyone froze. Helen's pulse quickened. "That didn't come from the radio," she said quietly. The voice spoke again, slower this time. 8 centuries have passed. The Guardians swore never to awaken me. Yet here you stand, human." The soldiers looked at each other in panic. One shouted, "We should get out now." But Helen took a step forward. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I am what they feared," the voice replied. "What they built their fortress to contain." A deep rumble echoed from the door. The energy veins brightened until the whole room glowed blue-white. Cracks spread through the ancient metal. Yuki yelled, "Back! Everyone back!" But before anyone could move, the door exploded outward in a burst of light. When the dust cleared, the chamber beyond was revealed, a vast hollow space with a glowing sphere floating in its center. It pulsed like a heartbeat, surrounded by metal roots that stretched in every direction. Helen stared, her voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" Yuki's scanner beeped wildly. It's not a weapon. It's a containment core. But the energy levels, this thing could power a planet." The voice spoke again, calmer now. "They trapped me here when I tried to stop the War of the Stars. They call me a danger. But I only wished to end the endless killing." Helen frowned. "You wanted peace?" "Yes. And they feared peace more than death." The sphere pulsed brighter, sending a warm wave of light across the humans. Every wound, every burn on Helen's body began to fade. The soldiers gasped in shock. "Commander," Rowan whispered, "it's healing us." Yuki looked at Helen. "What do we do with it?" Helen hesitated. "If it's that powerful, we can't just take it. Or destroy it." She looked at the glowing core again. "Maybe it's time someone listened to it." Outside, alien distress signals flickered across the sky. Their fleets were retreating, but their command channels buzzed with confusion and fear. They knew something had awakened beneath the bastion, something their ancestors swore never to free. In his last recorded message, General Rorvath had said one thing before the fortress collapsed. "If the gate ever falls, the stars will tremble again." Now that warning echoed across the galaxy. Back in the chamber, Helen stood before the glowing core. The light surrounded her, calm and endless. The voice whispered one last time. "You have broken their gate, human. But will you open their chains?" Helen looked up, her reflection glowing in the sphere's surface. She didn't answer. Not yet. Outside, the horizon shimmered, a quiet storm of light rising in the distance. Something was changing on Harmaean 6. And across the stars, countless eyes turned toward Earth,